Well, welcome to Faithful Fathering's podcast. My name is Rick Wertz with Faithful Fathering, and the founder and president of Faithful Fathering. We welcome you glad you're here to join us this morning, and wanted to let you know Faithful Fathering is all about encouraging and equipping dads to be faithful fathers, dads that prioritize physical presence, are engaged emotionally, and lead spiritually by example. Our vision is to encourage dads to be engaged in raising a godly generation and to reinvigorate the church on the fathering front. The topic for this podcast series is adoption. And in the studio with me today, I have a very special guest, Mr. Brian Stanton. Brian is an accomplished actor and producer. He's also a husband to his bride of over 20 years and has two beautiful daughters. Brian's also an adoptee who has written and produced a one-man production called Blank, a reference to the blank space on the birth certificate he received from his adoptive mother at age 23. And I think you'll be intrigued by his story as I was, his story in search of his unique identity and the journey to find his biological mom. Welcome, Brian.
I'm thrilled to be here with you.
That's a blessing to have you here with me. I just want to hear a bit about yourself, your family, and your journey.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I was born, put up for adoption, and raised in the great Kansas City. And I have always asked, about my biological mother, my birth mother, to my adoptive mother. And my adoptive mother has always said, Brian, you've always been curious about who, your roots and your biological parents. And I was adopted into a great family. My adoptive parents, I was close with. My adoptive mother and I did butt heads quite a bit. I was always challenging her, I think, as a child. Do you just kind of hit her on the shoulder every now and then, saying, "Do you still love me? You still love me, Ma? Huh?
I think
How
that's
about now?"
pretty normal.
Yeah, I know. You gonna leave me? You gonna leave me too? You gonna reject me? All that. But she stayed with me all these years, and I consider my brother and my sister my best friends. So I was fortunate. I was definitely one of the fortunate ones. However, the curiosity and the feelings of not fully belonging into that family, into that clan, was always there with me. And my mom confirmed that, as I said, that she said I always was curious. I was always asking. And when I was 23, I broached the subject again, and my adoptive mother said, well, hold on just a second. She went upstairs, came back down with an envelope and a piece of paper, and inside that envelope was my original birth certificate. Now, I'm not sure how many of the listeners out there know, but when you're adopted, you get two birth certificates. Well, you don't get them. That's going to be my point, but you get an amended birth certificate, and they put your adoptive parents on there. But you do have an original birth certificate, which is the actual record of your birth, with your birth mother's name on there. If the father is involved or known, then that name will be there, and so forth.
Well, right there, Brian. Now, you said something, and I want to make sure that those listening don't miss that. But You said, in discussing with your mom and running in with your mom, you said, "Are you going to leave me too?" And I hear that again when you say two birth certificates, because one was left with you. Correct?
Correct. Yeah. Good catch there. So there is something that's locked up in a way, right? Something that you're searching for. And I guess the birth certificate is that physical representation of something that we have felt. I should only speak for myself, but a lot of adoptees, I have felt something is always missing. You'll hear adoptees say that they feel like they're missing a limb, or there's a hole in themselves, an empty space inside themselves, or maybe that they're floating around because they just don't have any roots, just kind of waywardly floating in the air, not knowing where they're going.
Right.
But back to the birth certificate, there are several states where it's still, those original birth certificates are locked away. I would not have the right in several states to retrieve my birth certificate. Now, I was born in Kansas City, and those of you listening, it sits on the border of Kansas and Missouri. Oddly enough, Kansas has always had open records.
Open adoption records.
Yes.
Okay.
Meaning, if I was born on the Kansas side, I can go, to the courthouse or state cap, wherever you retrieve it, and get my records, get my original birth records.
Gotcha.
Request that. Mm-hmm. Now, Missouri was closed until 2017. Oh, my goodness. I hope I don't get that wrong. But just in the last few years, Missouri opened their records. So they had been closed. So Missouri was closed. I was born on the Missouri side. How did my adoptive mother get my birth certificate? Well, she had a connection through Catholic Charities, and there was an angel there that I definitely call her an angel, that broke the law and took a copy, printed out a copy of my original birth certificate because she understood that it is my right to have.
Sure.
And that's what my mother gave me that day in our kitchen in Kansas City when I was 23 years old.
Boom.
And there it was, plain as day. My birth mother's name was right there. And that's where it became real. So all these years where I was, I wonder who she is. And I had all these fantasies growing up of who she is and where I came from, who her family is. And same thing with my father. And now I have a real name, and that kind of takes you to a different level. Wow, she does exist.
Right. And that began a search.
And that began the search. Now, my father's name was blank. There was no name there. And my name on the birth certificate was blank. And like you mentioned, that is the title of my solo play, my one-man play called Blank, which obviously refers to that space, but also to the blank inside ourselves that we're trying to fill in of who we are. That search of identity in a way. So we, after a while, my mom said, well, when you're ready, you can let me know. I will go ahead and make that phone call for you and touch base with your birth mother, and I will let her know.
What a tremendous gesture for an adoptive mother. I can imagine an adoptive mother would almost sometimes take offense to the interest to be in your biological mom.
Yes, great point. Boy, to have the support of my parents and really my family as a whole, I can't tell you how great it felt. We adoptees can feel very guilty. We have a guilty conscience, and I joke around that I feel like I'm one of the most guilty people out there because I was rejected as a baby and given away, and then I grew up Catholic.
There you go.
So I had those guilt feelings. I do joke about it, but it's there.
Sure it is. Sure it is.
And rejection isn't easy for anybody, but for adoptees, it is magnified a little bit because of that first rejection. And
you throw a little bit of people pleaser mentality in there.
I have become the people pleaser, absolutely, to an extreme. And I mean, I've pulled back now since I'm more aware of it, but I was definitely the people pleaser. So. Adoptive parents can also feel, well, let me speak for myself here. I with the feeling of guilt, it's hard to say I want to go look for my biological mother because I don't want to hurt the feelings of my adoptive mother, or biological father. I don't want to hurt the feelings of my adoptive father. I'm going to tell you all this right now. The reason that I searched and the reason that I sought out my biological family had nothing to do with the love or lack of love of my adoptive family. It was just always there. For several personal reasons as well as for technical reasons, like medical reasons, sure. Stuff like that. Because when you go to a doctor, so the first thing they say, well, does this run in the family? I don't know. Right. So I know sometimes adoptive parents can feel threatened But don't feel threatened. Be their parent.
And I think that's true of parents overall. They feel like they've put out something for their children. Why would their children question anything?
Right.
There's a possessiveness to that, and I would assume the same
Sure.
with an adoptive parent, that they want to they expect you to appreciate all you've done for all they've done for you. And why would you go look somewhere else for another set of parents? And
Yeah.
that has to be blasted through, I would think.
Absolutely. And some parents call you the ungrateful adoptee. You should be grateful for what we did for you. But it's not about the adoptive parents. It's about the child and the child's well-being and the child's rights.
And
I have every right.
And that's what I hear resoundingly, is that sometimes we forget who this is really about. It's your identity that you're trying,
Right.
and you can live in the identity of your adoptive family, and that may suffice for some. But if you're questioning, then to have the right and to have the support to go search out your identity sounds like that's where your adoptive family really loved on you.
Well put, Rick. Well put. Yes. So to have their support meant the absolute world, because they're my parents. And at that time, where I'm extremely vulnerable, when I see that name on that paper, that's where I need a parent. And quite honestly, the more information the adoptive parents have about the biological roots of their adopted child, the better parents they're going to be.
Sure.
If that makes sense.
Right, particularly in that a lot of adoptive parents have no other kids, so they're trying to figure this thing out as well.
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
Without a doubt. Yeah. So the love and support that my mother gave me during that was
So that started
fantastic.
your journey to make contact. Did
Yes.
she make contact with you?
She made contact with her first, yeah. So she called her up, and my birth mother was delighted, over the moon, to hear that I would like to get in touch with her. And my mom just suggested, how about you just simply write him a letter? And that's what she did. She wrote me a letter. I received it. I was living in California at the time. I was studying theater at California Institute of the Arts, and I was in the middle of an acting class, and I went on break, and I went to check the mail, and boom, there it was.
Wow.
And just holding the letter and seeing the name, I was overcome with emotion.
Sure.
So of course, my acting teacher is like, read it to us. We can all be here for you, and you can use this. Everybody watch. And I was like, I think I'll go off on my
We don't
own.
need the drama.
So I went off on my own and I read it. And she said that she had been waiting years for this moment and to be able to connect with me. And she came right out and told me the truth. She said, Brian, I'm sure you have a question for me that I put to myself 23 years ago, which I was 23 at the time. And she said, how could I give away my own son?
Sure.
And she was 16. Very rough time for her. And she said she was at a high school party and was raped by 3 boys at the party. That obviously was a huge gut punch.
Sure.
You never know what you're going to get when you search, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
And we always have questions about our identity growing up, and adoptees have them even more so sometimes, I think, when they don't know where they came from. And this was the last thing on my mind that I thought that I would be a product of that,
Right.
Took some time to process. Luckily, I was dating an amazing woman at the time, and she came up, gave me comfort, and she is now my wife. But I was overcome with emotion. Honestly, I cried for about 24 hours just off and on. It would hit me when I didn't even expect. You almost don't realize how much you carry of what that meant to you at that time. But
Well, you've been bottling it in for a number of years.
I've been
as well.
bottling it in for a number of years. But, I was fortunate to have support from both my parents. I did read the letter to my parents, and I had their support. thankfully. And my wife was there, and of course my classmates at Cal Arts. So I was very fortunate to have a lot of love around me.
Sure.
A lot of love around me.
Mm-hmm.
But you know what, Rick? There's a thing. Well, that's an event that happened. I am not that event.
Absolutely.
At all.
Right.
And I moved forward with the relationship. We began to email each other. We spoke on the phone, and then I met her in person. And that was an interesting time too. She could not stop hugging me and touching me, and the hug was great, but it became almost too much. She kept apologizing over and over and over. I'm sorry I did that. I'm sorry I gave you away. I'm really sorry. Looking back, I could have done it. And she has 2 boys right now, so I have 2 half-brothers. And she said, looking back now, how I raised my boys, I could have done that. I could have made it work. She kept saying it. And Rick, there are 2 narratives that were given. When I was growing up adopted, I constantly hear, "Oh, your mother loved you so much, she gave you away." "Oh, your mother made the best decision for you," and everything's roses and beautiful, and yeah, I had a fortunate experience, a great adoptive family, but that's the narrative that I had. Now, I had this woman who did relinquish me, who's saying, "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that. I could have done it," and she kept touching me and hugging me, and I didn't know how to.
It's too much.
Process that at all.
Sure. Right.
And I became the adult and was trying to comfort her, saying, "Oh, no, I'm fine. Everything's fine. I've had a great life. Everything's fine." And I didn't honestly process my feelings at the time.
And you had mentioned that sometimes the mother in that situation reverts back.
Correct.
To being 16, which again stirs up all those guilt issues.
Yes. Yeah. Thanks for bringing that up. Yeah. Psychologically, you go back to the trauma. Mm-hmm. And she was 16 years old at that trauma, and I was a 23-year-old man. And looking back, when I was crying all that time, I'm wondering if I reverted to being that baby that was taken away from his mother. And that's where all the emotion came in from there. But yes, I understood her point of view when I later learned about a little more on the psychology of the relinquishment, and also confiding in a lot of other birth mothers.
Right.
Which I could probably get to my play now because that led me to that world. Nonetheless, I created a relationship with my birth mother, and still have a relationship today, and my daughters are a part of her life.
Fantastic. Well, and then those outside the adoption world can be as crass as to say, well, at least she didn't abort you.
Oh, gosh, that's the worst thing to say to an adopted person.
That's where I look so forward to those that are tuned in now, Brian, is that there is a whole new level of sensitivity to understanding the complexity, the psychology that affects an adoptee and the adoptive parents both. Yeah. I mean, I spoke of the guilt that we can feel. We also sometimes feel that we have to be grateful for this person that came in and rescued us, right? But no, I'm a child. Well, not anymore, but I was a child. Sure.
And I just needed parents, and I needed support for the normal feelings that come up. And we all have our issues. We all have different traumas. We all have our own individual experiences, adopted or not. And a good parent is sensitive to those. And
being the theatrical performer you are, the actor that you are, you wanted to make this a message to get out there to share a little bit about that journey and your connections and your engagement with raising the bar for awareness of adoptees' needs as well as just the adoption world in general.
I appreciate it. Thank you. I began to write a play. Yeah, about that experience, about I call it a journey in search of identity. And it is about the questions and natural questions that always came up for me, and the conversations I've had with others about who am I, and with the backstory of my adoption that led me to my birth mother. And I premiered it in 2010 in Hollywood. It ran about 8 weeks. And that's where I began to really have a connection with the adoptee and foster world, with that community. Because then I began performing for foster and adoption support organizations, awareness organizations that help spread awareness and education about adoption and foster care. Typically about adoptees and those that went through the foster care system. And hearing their voices, here's a play that I had already performed numerous times, tens and tens of times, and hearing their voices after, like during a Q&A or a conversation after the play, I'd be like, oh, that's why I wrote that line. Oh, that's what that little exchange and dialogue I wrote means right there. Oh, so I began to understand more about what I wrote because a lot of it came from my subconscious.
Sure.
And once I understood that, then I started to understand myself a little bit more and what adoption meant to me and what it means to me being an adopted person. And that opened up my awareness and more dialogue with those in the community, especially the birth mothers, because I wanted to understand my mother more, my birth mother more.
Sure.
And when that happened, looking back on my reunion when I was 23 years old, I was like 35 or 33, I think, when I first started performing blank, but no, 35. And I became more aware of what that situation meant and why she was apologizing to me all the time and why she just couldn't let go of me. And, I broached the subject with her and said, because I think I pushed her away. I was scared.
Sure.
I pushed her away a bit.
Right.
I didn't know what to make of it. And I said, no, I do want you in my life. I want you in my family. I want my kids, in your life as well. And I understand you more now, and because she's like, well, you told me you were okay. What happened?
I just said that. I didn't mean it.
Right. You told me everything was just fine. You got a perfect life. And she did see blank. She saw the play.
Okay.
Yeah.
What was her reaction?
So it's funny. She was here with her husband, who's a great man, been a great support through all this. But they were sitting in the back corner of the theater, and I was in my dressing room, and I opened the door, and I called my stage manager over, and I said, come here. And I have this little box of Kleenex here. Can you give this to the woman sitting in the back corner of the theater? She said, yeah, no problem. And not even 2 minutes later, there's a knock on my door. It's my stage manager. She's giving me back the Kleenex, said she already has a whole box of her own. But her reaction out in the lobby afterwards, as we're talking with people, she introduced herself as the character in my play as my mother.
Wow.
Which was very big for her because she, as a birth mother, still carries a lot of that shame. She doesn't like to talk about it. It was an extremely difficult time for her. So that was a special night.
In the process, what did you learn about your identity?
Good question. Well, identity, we identify with so many things in life, and this is what I explore is, am I the actor? Am I the father? Am I the husband? Am I the man? Am I, all these external things, but what is it inside that we have? And Rick, since I was an actor, at school, I was given an outline called Analysis of Your Character, and we just tear apart the character and
the character you were going to portray.
Yeah,
okay.
Exactly. Any character that I would play in any play. As I'm analyzing a character, I find out everything about them. I'll make up their favorite color, their favorite food, and then, but why do they make the choices they make? And I know everything about the character, and then I'm ready to go on stage, but I don't know a lick about me. Who am I, right? And so the play is me kind of going through that outline, trying to figure out who I am. Well, I learned that I'm not going to pretend to have all the answers here, Rick, but I learned that we're always reaching for something external, something out there, but you need to dive deep inside yourself. There's something bigger. There's and you and I have spoken a lot about this, but there's the spirit there, the essence, the soul, whatever you want to call it, the awareness. There's something deep inside of you that is going through this human experience, and just trying to figure out this journey that we're all on. But identity-wise, learning who my mother was and where she came from and meeting her relatives, it began to ground me a little bit as well. I wasn't as lost. Mm. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I asked our listeners here, are you as intrigued as I am in this journey, this tremendous journey of understanding self, that understanding that it's not about all the answers, it's about understanding that maybe there's a few more questions. And I think as a father, that's one of the things we have to push, is to maybe ask those questions instead of jumping to the conclusions that we think we have the answers, to be a little more open, to keep that dialogue going, especially dads with teenagers, right? We got to keep those kids talking to connect with them. But Brian, I just thank you so much for your story here. I know it's the beginning. Folks, don't tune out. There's more to the story as he continues his search for his father after he found his biological mother, or birth mother. I should be clear on that. But it's a fabulous journey, and I just, again, encourage dads to keep asking those questions. Understand it isn't always about knowing the answer, but just searching one more question. And I just want to encourage and equip dads to understand that that's the job of a faithful father, to prioritize physical presence, engage emotionally, lead spiritually by example. That's the dad you're called to be, and that's the dad the next generation needs. God bless, Godspeed.